Damn, niggas still down with that shit?
I just hope it changes. I might not live long enough to know it, but I hope somebody you see this and it changes.
Make sure you know what you're taking before you take it, because at this point it seems as though the people that are selling it have no care about what they're giving us.
Anywhere in the world where there's drugs at, it's gonna be chaos. And with chaos at, it's gonna be what? Lack of discipline. No control. So it's like a course going look like it's a bad place. It's really not a bad place, but it got a great savior, bro. This shit is designed to be like this.
Welcome back to Homeless Crisis News. 27 people began overdosing in one Baltimore neighborhood almost at the same time. Sirens flooded Penn North. Paramedics treated people along Pennsylvania Avenue, while volunteers searched alleys and abandoned row houses for anyone still breathing. Some victims slipped back into overdose after Narcan wore off. By the end of that morning, all 27 were alive. But survival was not escape. When the ambulances left the dealer's withdrawal and poison supply remained. Baltimore says overdose deaths are falling. Hundreds of millions of settlement dollars are beginning to move. Yet Penn North is still waiting to learn whether that money can reach people before the next dangerous batch does. What happened here was not an ending. It was a warning for America too. At around 9:20 that Thursday morning, Bill Brooks was inside the Penn North Recovery Center when reports began arriving from a few blocks away. He could hear sirens building beyond the center's walls. People were collapsing near Pennsylvania and North Avenues. This was not one person found unconscious behind a building. Calls were coming from different corners, alleys, and abandoned row houses. Police closed streets. Ambulances lined the intersection. A triage area formed outside the Pennsylvania Avenue branch of the Enoch Pratt Free Library. Brooks and other outreach workers moved through the neighborhood carrying Narcan. First responders and volunteers searched 177 abandoned buildings, calling into dark rooms for anyone who might have used the same drug and disappeared from view. The people they found ranged from 25 to 55 years old. 27 were transported to 8 Baltimore area hospitals. At least 5 reached critical condition. Narcan restored breathing for some. Then, as its effect faded, the substance still inside their bodies pulled them back toward overdose. Responders had to act again. Investigators initially heard that free samples, known on the street as testers, may have been distributed that morning. Dealers sometimes use testers to introduce a new product. But nobody at Penn North could immediately say exactly what those packets contained. That uncertainty was part of the danger. By afternoon, discarded gloves, naloxone boxes, and medical wrappers remained near the intersection. Families searched for information. Residents watched television crews describe their neighborhood as the center of another Baltimore emergency. Yet one fact offered relief: every person transported that morning survived. 27 people had come close enough to death to require a citywide response, and 27 people were still alive when the cameras began leaving. If your city has a corner like Penn North, tell us where you are watching from, and subscribe as we follow what happens after the headlines move on. The number of victims shocked Baltimore. But for people who live near Pennsylvania Avenue, the ambulances, the Narcan, and the sight of someone falling unconscious were not entirely new. What frightened them was the scale. To understand why an emergency this large could erupt in broad daylight, we have to look at the neighborhood that had already learned how to keep walking while people collapsed beside it. Penn North is not an overdose scene. It is families waiting for buses, children entering the library, worshipers gathering at church, and shopkeepers raising metal gates each morning. People live lives around Pennsylvania and North Avenues. They buy food, greet neighbors, and hurry home before dark. But another economy operates in the same public space. Residents have described open-air drug sales continuing along blocks, sometimes in view of traffic. People searching for relief from withdrawal know where to walk. Dealers know how quickly desperation can become a customer. Everyone else learns which corners to avoid, when to look away, and when someone lying still requires attention. That does not mean the neighborhood has accepted what is happening. It means constant emergency changes the way danger feels. An ambulance that would stop another street can become background noise here. A person bending forward under the weight of a drug may draw only a glance. Naloxone is carried not because collapse is expected on one extraordinary day, but because the next overdose may happen before help arrives. The mass overdose broke through that numbness. 27 people falling within hours was too large to blend into the routine. The intersection became a disaster zone, yet many residents understood that the cameras were recording an emergency built from years of smaller emergencies nobody filmed. Afterwards, some people entered treatment. Others returned to the same streets. Recovery workers kept distributing naloxone. Families kept watching for relatives. The neighborhood reopened because neighborhoods cannot remain closed until addiction disappears. This is the trap of Penn North. The people living there are asked to survive the drug market without being defined by it. The people using there are seen repeatedly at their lowest moment, while the reasons they return remain mostly invisible. Poverty matters, trauma matters, withdrawal matters. So do isolation, unstable housing, and treatment that may be unavailable precisely when someone is ready to accept it. But in 2025, even those familiar pressures could not fully explain what responders were seeing. Something inside Baltimore's drug supply had changed, and Narcan alone could not always hold it back. For years, one word explained much of Baltimore's overdose crisis: fentanyl. By 2025, that word was no longer enough. After the Penn North emergency, investigators tested 2 syringes collected during the neighborhood search. Both contained fentanyl. They also contained N-Methylclonazepam, an illegal benzodiazepine capable of adding another layer of sedation. Medetomidine, a veterinary sedative not approved for human use, was initially suspected. It was not detected in those 2 syringes. That distinction matters. The evidence does not prove medetomidine caused the 27 overdoses, and 2 syringes cannot identify everything consumed by every victim. What the testing confirmed was frightening enough. The street supply had become a moving mixture. Naloxone can reverse the opioid component of an overdose and restore breathing. It does not directly reverse every sedative mixed beside it. A person may wake, appear stable, and then lose consciousness again as naloxone fades, while other substances remain active. That can require repeated doses, longer observation, and more complicated hospital care. Across Maryland, health officials were also tracking medetomidine and increasingly severe withdrawal. Patients and outreach workers described symptoms that could last longer and become harder to manage. Some people did not know they had been exposed until their bodies reacted. This is what makes the modern drug market different from the image many Americans still carry. A buyer is not selecting one predictable substance at a known strength. The name used on the corner may stay the same while the chemistry changes underneath it. One packet may quiet withdrawal. Another packet bought hours later may contain a stronger opioid, a benzodiazepine, a veterinary sedative, or a combination the user never requested. Even experienced users cannot reliably see that difference. They can change dealers. They can use a smaller amount. They can carry naloxone and avoid using alone. Those choices may reduce risk, but none can make an unregulated supply predictable. The mystery is no longer why one dangerous batch appeared. The deeper question is why someone who nearly died from it might return to the same corner the next day. To understand that, we have to stop treating addiction as a choice made only when the drug enters the body. The return often begins hours earlier when withdrawal does. From the outside, returning looks impossible to understand. A person is revived on a sidewalk. They learn the same supply nearly killed others. Then hours later, they search for it again. That decision is described as choosing drugs over life. But by the time withdrawal begins, the choice no longer feels simple. The body can turn against itself. Sweating becomes shaking, the stomach cramps, vomiting starts, muscles ache, anxiety rises into panic, sleep disappears. With newer mixtures, some patients have experienced symptoms that were more severe, lasted longer, and were harder for hospitals to control. The person knows one thing may stop it quickly, another dose. They may not be chasing pleasure. They may be trying to stand upright, stop vomiting, quiet their mind, or make it through the next hour alive. Now, add the street. Medication may be available, but the clinic may require identification, transportation, an appointment, or waiting through hours the body cannot tolerate. A treatment bed may open after the moment of willingness has passed. Someone without stable housing may have nowhere safe to endure the first days. Someone carrying everything they own may fear losing it while inside. Recovery asks for planning at the exact moment addiction destroys the ability to plan. The dealer requires almost none. That does not make the dealer merciful. It makes the illegal market immediate. At Penn North, the same corner can offer both the poison and the temporary relief from the sickness created by that poison. Each return strengthens the cycle. Each stronger mixture can make the next withdrawal more frightening. Each overdose can leave the person more isolated from family, work, housing, and the belief that recovery is still possible. This is why naloxone is essential, but incomplete. It can give someone another morning. It cannot decide what waits for them during that morning. A hospital discharge paper is not a home. A phone number is not an available bed. A warning about a dangerous batch does not remove the physical need already screaming inside the body. Behind every return is a history the sidewalk cannot show. Sometimes that history includes a parent who spent years believing love, anger, distance, or one final rescue might be enough. For Yvonne Holden, that history ended on her son's 50th birthday. Yvonne Holden understood addiction from both sides of the door. For decades, she used heroin and pills while raising 4 sons and working in Baltimore hospitals. In 2010, treatment and church support helped her recover. Recovery did not remove addiction from her family. 2 siblings died after contracting HIV through needles. Friends were lost or injured. Her brother still struggled. Yvonne carried Narcan with church members because she knew how quickly a body could stop breathing. Her son Al remained at the center of that fear. In a baby portrait, he has round cheeks and tiny fists. As an adult, he loved boxing and dreamed of a landscaping business with his brothers. But his life moved between addiction, the street, and prison. On September 21st, 2021, Al planned to celebrate his 50th birthday. He had been released from prison weeks earlier. His family prepared a cookout. Yvonne visited the house where he was staying. Al said he wanted to rest before the party. Before leaving, she told him she loved him. He said he loved her too. Less than an hour later, Yvonne returned. Al was kneeling beside his bed, his head lowered as though praying. He had died from a fentanyl overdose. His family attempted CPR. Yvonne, who carried naloxone to help strangers survive, did not have any with her that morning. Outside, the birthday gathering became a vigil. While the family waited for the medical examiner to collect Al's body, relatives stood in the backyard beside his cake. Then they sang, "Happy Birthday." This is what an overdose number cannot contain. It cannot show the cookout that never began, the business that never opened, or the mother who knew how to save someone, but arrived when saving was no longer possible. Yvonne had escaped addiction. She could offer experience, faith warnings, and love. None gave her control over the packet her son used, or the moment he used it alone. Penn North was different when 27 people collapsed. Help arrived quickly. Naloxone was everywhere and nobody died. But Baltimore would soon learn that surviving one mass overdose did not prevent another. The warning was about to repeat itself. 8 days after 27 people collapsed, the ambulances returned. On July 18th, 5 more people were hospitalized after overdosing in Penn North. Police found no evidence connecting the event to the earlier batch. Then in October, it happened a 3rd time. At least 10 people overdosed near Pennsylvania and North Avenues. 6 were transported to hospitals. 4 refused further treatment. Again, no one died. Across 3 mass overdose incidents, 42 people were affected in 3 months. The repetition changed the meaning of the first emergency. July 10th could no longer be dismissed as one contaminated package moving briefly through the neighborhood. The supply was unstable enough for another cluster to appear, then another. Later testing connected to the October incident detected medetomidine, the veterinary sedative officials were monitoring. Penn North had become a place where the next mixture revealed itself through bodies on the pavement. Each event triggered the same machinery. Police secured the intersection. Paramedics administered naloxone. Outreach teams distributed test strips and safer use supplies. City agencies and reporters returned. Then the streets reopened. Residents asked why resources flooded the neighborhood after people collapsed rather than remaining before the emergency. They knew the cycle. Tragedy created attention, attention created promises, and promises became harder to see once cameras left. The fact that nobody died in these 3 incidents matters. It shows what rapid response naloxone-trained neighbors and outreach workers can accomplish. 42 overdose victims represented 42 opportunities for a different ending. But it also creates a dangerous illusion. A city can become better at preventing death while the conditions producing overdose remain unchanged. More people survive the immediate poisoning, yet return to unstable housing, withdrawal trauma, in the same open-air market. Success becomes measured in breaths restored, not lives rebuilt. That is not a criticism of naloxone. Without it, Penn North might have counted funerals instead of hospital discharges. It is a reminder that rescue is the first step, not the destination. And on Baltimore's hardest corners, that first step is often delivered by people with no ambulance, no medical degree, and no time to wait. They carry a small box that has become part of daily life. In Penn North, naloxone is no longer medical equipment. It sits inside backpacks, church offices, and outreach vans. People carry it for relatives, neighbors, and strangers whose names they never learn. Pastor Terrence Rogers has distributed it near Gethsemane Baptist Church. He has also presided over funerals for people it did not reach in time. For him, Penn North is the community he loves and refuses to abandon. Peer recovery workers bring authority. Many have survived addiction. They know how withdrawal sounds in a person's voice. They understand that someone refusing help in the morning may ask for it before sunset. So they return. They offer naloxone test strips, water transportation, and conversation. They teach people not to use alone and to begin with less. During an overdose, they call for help, restore breathing, and remain nearby because unconsciousness may return. A plastic spray, a paper strip, a phone number written by hand. Each object creates time, but time alone does not create recovery. Naloxone creates minutes for breathing to return. A trusted conversation may create an opening for treatment. A ride can close the distance between saying yes and reaching a clinic before withdrawal changes the answer. Trust cannot be distributed during a press conference. It is built by showing up when cameras are absent, remembering a name, and returning after someone refuses help. It allows a person to believe that an offer is not another temporary promise. Yet outreach workers cannot manufacture treatment beds, housing, or follow-up care. They can reverse an overdose and watch the person return to the corner. They can create a moment of willingness and discover that the next part of the system is full distant or fragmented. Penn North does not lack people willing to save lives. It lacks a bridge between being revived and rebuilding one. Baltimore has an opportunity to construct that bridge with money recovered from companies accused of helping fuel the opioid epidemic. The amount is enormous. The question is whether it can move as quickly as naloxone does. Baltimore sued opioid manufacturers and distributors independently and secured nearly $600 million. That sounds large enough to transform every corner in Penn North. But a settlement total is not treatment already delivered. By April 2026, Baltimore had allocated more than $120 million from its opioid restitution fund. About $13 million had been spent. 11 organizations received $2 million in the first grant round. The city also launched a dashboard tracking spending. These are meaningful beginnings. They are not proof that help reaches someone during the narrow hour when that person is ready to leave the street. The money must move through contracts, oversight boards, applications, reporting, and care providers. Accountability matters because this opportunity will not return, but urgency matters too. A neighborhood group may possess the trust required to reach people in Penn North while lacking staff for a complicated application. A treatment provider may add beds, but still lack transportation follow-up workers or housing for patients leaving care. Funding one piece does not connect the pathway. The real measure will not be the size of Baltimore's legal victory. It will be whether someone revived at Pennsylvania Avenue can enter treatment that day, remain long enough to stabilize, receive medication without interruption, find mental health support, and leave for somewhere safer than the corner where the overdose began. That requires public reporting beyond dollars awarded. How many people were reached? How many entered treatment? How many remained after 30 or 90 days? How many found housing? How many returned to an emergency room? The dashboard can track spending. Baltimore must track survival after rescue. Nearly $600 million creates a historic opportunity, but it also removes the city's strongest excuse. Resources now exist to attempt something larger than another temporary response. Penn North does not need another promise made after ambulances arrive. It needs an exit that remains open after they leave. And that exit must address more than the drug itself. Escape does not begin when someone is carried away from Penn North. It begins when they have somewhere safer to go. First comes immediate access. After naloxone restores breathing, a person accepting treatment should not face days of calls, transportation problems, or uncertainty about a bed. The connection must happen while willingness is alive. Next comes medication and medical care beyond one appointment. Fentanyl dependence and new sedatives can make withdrawal unpredictable. Treatment must adjust instead of treating every relapse as proof that recovery is unwanted. Then comes housing. Recovery becomes harder when medications can be stolen. Sleep is interrupted, and every morning begins near the same market. A temporary bed creates distance. Stable housing creates routine, privacy, and somewhere to plan tomorrow. Mental health care identification, transportation, work, and family support are not optional. They are parts of the exit. The final requirement is time. A person may leave treatment, return to use, or refuse help repeatedly before something holds. A system designed only for the first yes will lose people after the first no. Recovery workers must return without beginning the relationship again. None of this guarantees success. People still make decisions. Programs still fail. Residents will demand relief from dealing intoxication, discarded needles, and violence. Protecting residents and supporting people with addiction cannot be opposite goals. A functioning response must do both. Penn North should not remain an emergency room without walls. Its families deserve safe sidewalks, businesses functioning, homes, and a future not defined by footage of people collapsing. People using drugs there deserve more than repeated revival until one overdose arrives too quickly. Baltimore already knows how to restore a breath. The test for 2026 is whether the city can connect enough doors to restore life. That is how Penn North begins to escape. 27 people collapsed in Penn North, and 27 survived. Baltimore proved it can respond when crisis becomes impossible to ignore. The harder test begins after breathing returns. 3 mass overdoses, an unpredictable drug supply, and nearly $600 million lead to one question: will the city build a pathway out or become better at reviving people inside the same cycle? Tell us what recovery should look like in your city, and subscribe as we document America's street crisis. Penn North does not need cameras awaiting the next collapse. It needs timely treatment housing that lasts and people who return. A restored breath is survival. A restored life is escape. Disclaimer: this documentary is for educational and journalistic purposes only. It discusses homelessness, poverty, mental health, addiction-related issues, housing policy, and public spending. Composite characters are based on patterns from public records, housing research, shelter data, court filings, and published case studies. They are not intended to identify any specific private individual. This video does not promote illegal activity, drug use, harassment, or harmful behavior. Some footage has been edited or blurred for privacy, safety, and compliance with YouTube community guidelines.